Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's such a nice day today, 1st of September, for those of you watching on demand. And we thought it's a good start to the year is to start off by thinking about how to keep our children safe in our schools. And we're really delighted to be joined by Dr Holly Powell-Jones from the Online Media Law UK. And Holly, you are so well experienced and qualified in the world of criminology, and also you were a journalist. So what a privilege it is to have you as a guest today. You guys are going to love Holly's session. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself so that we can
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to talk a bit in the session about my journalism and how I got into digital criminology. But yes, I'm a criminologist by trade. Quick disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. So although I will be talking a lot about the law today, if anyone's got any questions that sound too much like legal questions, I will be directing you to proper legal firms for legal advice. And I can recommend some of those. So if people do need help.
That's really good advice, to be fair.
Yes, but I'll be talking about social media and the law and children. So
fabulous. And before we came on, Holly and I were just chatting about how difficult it is to keep children safe online nowadays, with different platforms offering different messages out constantly. So if you've turned up today, thank you for keeping our children in our schools safe. So if you're a DSL, a safeguarding lead, or you're just interested in looking after children and keeping them safe, this is definitely for you. So grab a pen and paper. You're going to love Holly's presentation. I shall leave you be, and I'll be back at the end for a Q&A. So if you've got any questions, put them in the comments. We love a question, you know we do. We'll be happy to help. Thank you so much. Enjoy.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction kind of about my background. I'm going to talk about my work that I do in schools, and also then delve into some research in this area to try and help you navigate what can be at times quite an overwhelming remit, I think, with regard to children and digital risks and safeguarding in schools. I always start actually my assemblies in schools by saying, you know, I'm Holly, I'm a criminologist. Would anyone like to guess what I study for a living? And yes, I do study crime, and particularly digital crime in online digital context, and particularly involving young people as well. One of the questions I like to ask young people in assembly, and it's something for you to have a think about now: how much digitally facilitated crime do you think young people encounter? And the answer is, we have no idea. We really do not know. So it's estimated that probably about 1 in 4 crimes, if that, are ever reported to the police. I suspect that actually it may be even lower for digital and online crime. But with official crime statistics, we're often only ever getting the tip of the iceberg. You'll be familiar with that iceberg analogy. The bit that we can see, the bit that we know about, is a small proportion of the overall picture and what is there. One of the questions that I ask my students in assembly to put their hands up and answer, and I'm going to ask you to have a think about now for a minute or so, is why don't people report crime? And specifically, why do you think that young people themselves would not report crime that they encounter in a digital context? Just take a minute or so to have a think. What are the reasons why people might not report being a crime? Why have we only got a small percentage being reported? Now, there's lots of different studies into why this might be, but some of the common reasons include fear of judgment. So worrying about what friends will think, what families or teachers or other people in the community will think, particularly even if you've been a victim of crime, worrying that people will have a negative opinion of you or maybe even blame you somehow for what's happened. Another common reason is that people may actually know the person who has committed a crime. It might be somebody in their peer group. a friend or a relative or a partner, etc. So somebody that they might not want to get into trouble, somebody they might care about, or actually even somebody that they might fear in terms of retaliation if they report that person. So that can be one. Another common reason is shame and embarrassment about even being a victim of crime. We still carry a lot of negative emotions associated with being a victim of crime, or having any kind of experiences that are distressing or painful or upsetting. It can be the case that people are embarrassed, they don't want to talk about it. Perhaps it's to the point where they think actually it's going to be too painful or too upsetting to have to go over it again and talk to someone about it. So they'd rather just forget it and not have to think about it anymore. A sad but very common reason why people don't report is that they don't think that anything will happen as a result of them reporting it. So young people, and this has happened in my research as well, will say, don't think anything will happen, nobody will do anything. It's that notion that nobody's going to care. It might be fear that they're not going to be believed. Quite often young people have said to me they're worried about a lack of evidence. So they think that if they don't have all the evidence themselves to put together a case, there's no point reporting it because they're not going to get justice. Or the idea that the police, teachers or other authorities are not going to take any action, or nothing will be done. There'll be no repercussions or consequences for the perpetrator. So there's no point reporting it. And the last, and this is a really important one, reason why young people might not report being a victim of crime online is because they do not know that something is a crime. And I think this is a really common one actually with adults as well. But my research with young people shows that lots of young people are not aware, they're not clear on what is a criminal offence in a digital context. And if you don't know you've been a victim of crime, or that the thing that you've seen or experienced is actually illegal, you're obviously not going to report it, are you? So this is kind of where I come in with my education side. I think if people are clear on what is illegal in a digital context, and I do unashamedly champion young people coming forward to report incidences, because it helps us to get a clearer picture of what's happening online. But I really wanted to start from this perspective, particularly for those of you that are in safeguarding roles with young people, from this perspective of empathy, of thinking about all those barriers to reporting, and trying to work on making those reporting mechanisms as safe and easy and encourageable as possible, as a way to keep children safe online, because we don't know the whole picture. That being said, if any of you have turned on the news in the past 3 months or so, you've probably seen any number of headlines, such as the ones up on the screen now, about children and digital risk. In fact, I think this can all be quite overwhelming to the point of paralysis. Sometimes the amount of information that we're having to deal with now about digital risks to children. We've kind of got new technology rapidly advancing. Generative AI is here and being used. We've seen kind of deep fakes featuring more and more in the news, and also things like VPNs, virtual private networks, being used by people, particularly in the wake of this summer's new age verification technology that's being implemented for under 18s to access certain types of content and certain sites. So VPNs, again, are a new thing now that suddenly we're becoming aware of young people and how that might interact with digital risk as well. I want to start by saying the news operates in an attention economy. And what that means is that they're often vying for our attention with shocking and kind of attention grabbing headlines as much as possible. And that does sometimes mean that the most shocking, most hard hitting, most distressing material makes its way to the top of the news agenda and is more likely to kind of then make its way to audiences, as opposed to what you might think of as the typical experience of a typical child. And it's exactly the reason that certain incidences are particularly rare or unusual or particularly extreme, that they then may get featured in the news, and that can sometimes distort our perception of the risks. And unfortunately, I think also nowadays charities and organisations operate in this attention economy as well. So what that means is even people doing independent research and reports in this area and trying to generate knowledge are also trying to make sure that they have got big, scary headlines, statistics and quotes that are then going to get picked up by those news outlets and make it onto the news. Part of the reason that I know a lot about this is because my background is in journalism. So I used to be a news reader and reporter. There's a little photo of me reading the news live on air, as I used to do in radio. And a lot of this kind of material does operate in that thing of the most attention grabbing, the most serious, the most distressing information ends up getting the most coverage. So how did I end up getting into criminology from journalism? Well, there was one story that really started this change for me, and that was in 2013. We had a newly elected police and crime commissioner in all the counties across the UK, and in Kent they decided they were going to have a youth police and crime commissioner, and her name was Paris Brown. I don't know if anybody remembers this story or is familiar with it, but just to recap, Paris Brown was a 17-year-old who was chosen to be the youth police and crime commissioner, so representative for young people in the police and crime commissioner's office, and she ended up being investigated by police for some offensive messages that she'd posted on Twitter when she was quite a bit younger, I think between the ages of 13 and 16 or so. And she had got rid of that Twitter account by the time she'd taken on the new role. However, those messages were found, they were publicised in the news, and she then faced a police investigation. There was a big, what I would probably call a media feeding frenzy around this teenager and her social media posts that then resulted in her stepping down. Now, at the time, because I was a journalist, I'd had training on UK media law. You actually have to pass a 3-hour unseen exam in the UK to qualify as a journalist to show that you know about media law. So I knew about what things could and couldn't be broadcast and published. And it occurred to me that people like Paris Brown, who now had, through technology, the ability to broadcast, distribute, publish, just like we did as journalists, had none of that training and none of that grounding in what was illegal and what was safe to post online, let alone any of the other ethical issues. And I thought that's a little bit unfair, really, that you could be in trouble for something that you might not know is illegal. And the other thing that really shocked me is at the time, I didn't know at what age you could be convicted of a crime. And hopefully you all know it because you'll work in this context with young people anyway. But we've got the lowest age of criminal responsibility in all of Europe here in England and Wales. It's just 10 years old. So by the time you are in secondary school, you can be held criminally culpable, essentially, for breaking the law. And I found that really, really shocking. And it was off the back of that I decided I'm going to design some training for teenagers, for secondary school pupils about media law and kind of aim it at ordinary social media users so that they know where the law is, what kinds of things they can and can't distribute, broadcast, publish, etc. So how it works, I like to go in and give young people lots of examples of different behaviour online, and then I'll ask them to discuss with their peers and vote for how risky they think it is. So if they think it's something that could result in arrest, police investigation, prosecution or prison, a criminal risk, they can vote for red category. If they think it's something that could get them sued, so a legal risk, they can vote for orange. If they think it's something that's probably not going to get them arrested, not going to get them sued, but it might result in being fired from a job, for example, or maybe being expelled from school, or another social risk, they can put it in yellow. And if they think there are no risks whatsoever, they can vote for category green. So it's kind of like a traffic light system of risk, if you like, with kind of red with the criminal, orange legal, yellow for social, and green if it's fine. And then that way round, I get to find out from them kind of what they think about the risks. So let's take an example of walking behind a girl down a corridor and filming her in a short skirt, on a mobile phone, and being able to see her underwear from the angle that the camera's being held, for example. I would say to them, discuss that and then vote. How risky is that behaviour? After this, and hopefully most of you recognise that that would be a red risk for criminal behaviour, what I do next is I just give a little overview of the relevant legislation. We've actually got quite a lot in this particular area. You may or may not be aware of Gina Martin's excellent campaign, which was successful in 2019, of criminalising so-called upskirting. So that is exactly what that example was. So filming under somebody's clothes without their knowledge, without their consent, criminalised, and is now covered under the Sexual Offences Act as a sexual offence since 2019. In addition, I'll highlight, again, in age-appropriate language, in a straightforward way, that if that person is under 18 and it is considered sort of indecent or sexual imagery of that person, they could also be on the wrong side of child protection laws, in this case, the Protection of Children Act 1978, which has been around since before I was born. So very long-standing legislation that we have there around indecent imagery of children if that person was under 18. I might also mention a few other things that we've had in the last few years. So in 2015, we criminalised the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. So that's basically referred to as revenge porn sometimes. It's probably more appropriate now. We would use the term intimate image abuse or image-based sexual abuse. That's been a crime since 2015. And actually, as recent as last year, we had new legislation, thanks to the Online Safety Act, that also criminalises the threats to share imagery of somebody that's nude or semi-nude or sexual without their consent. And that's quite a recent addition to the landscape. So kind of to give a little bit of an overview of what the legal context is for these different behaviours and what the law is. I don't know how familiar you are with the Online Safety Act, but it's been everything that I live and breathe pretty much for the last couple of years. That came into effect from the 1st of January last year. You're probably most familiar with the duties and obligations that places on platforms, on the providers of websites and services, for example, to keep children safe online. So there's new duties to comply with that. That's how we've got the age verification and other things coming in. You may not know that it also created many new criminal offences, including some that you can see on the screen there now: epilepsy trolling, so deliberately sharing flashing imagery to try and trigger a seizure in somebody, encouraging or assisting serious harm. So obviously encouraging suicide is already illegal, but now encouraging serious harm, or including self-harm, is a criminal offence. Cyber flashing, so that is sending unwanted, unsolicited images or video of genitals to somebody, was criminalised as well. And as I said, we've got the sharing or threatening to share of intimate images of somebody without their consent. Now, it's really important as well to highlight, in that new legislation, there is a line about whether the imagery shows or is appearing to show a particular person. Now, that line on appearing to show is quite important because that does cover AI generated imagery, so sometimes called deep fake imagery. So if the intimate images of somebody, they may not be real or authentic, but if somebody has essentially created them, combining images of that person, photographs, and then pornographic material, that sharing of that material is now a criminal offence, or even threatening to share it. What's not illegal is the pure creation of that image. And there is an ongoing campaign at the moment to try and criminalise the creation of those deep fake kind of nudes or intimate images. including people that say they do it for personal use, for example, without consent at the moment. That's not breaking any criminal law unless it is involving an under 18, in which case it falls foul of the aforementioned child protection laws. But there is a campaign ongoing on that one, and watch this space, because the government has promised that that is something that they are committed to criminalising. So as you can see, the law changes in this area really rapidly, and all of these things have just come in kind of into effect from the last year. So I update the law every year. I also like to incorporate lots of real life case studies as well. So I might talk about things that have been in the news that relate to intimate image sharing. We had our first ever conviction for cyber flashing, this new offence, in March 2024. So that then got featured in the following academic years kind of list of case studies that I talk about, to try and show some of the real life consequences for real people who break the law as well. So it's not all just hypothetical. I like to include these stories too. And we've also had a case just this last month gone about somebody admitting creating a deep fake naked images of somebody that he knew, and admitting that, and being convicted of that as well. So back to the news on that note. How do we keep on top of digital risk and not feel overwhelmed by the amount of proliferation, if you want to call it that, of different risks online to children these days? So starting with a really important linguistic point, and actually to paraphrase Professor Sonia Livingston, who is undoubtedly the UK expert when it comes to online and digital risk to children, not all risks result in harm. And actually trying to eliminate all risks entirely is not conducive to good development for young people. A certain amount of risk taking is normal and healthy. And actually, again, as Professor Livingston points out, often the more time that children spend online, yes, their risks may increase, but also the opportunities can increase as well. And there are lots of positive uses for young people and technology as well. So I'm a big believer that banning children from technology, refusing them the opportunity to use kind of new technology is not the way to go. However, when it comes to sort of categorizing risk, I would really recommend using this particular framework of it's called the Core 4. You may have heard of it before, or the 4 C's. And this basically has been taken from, if you've read the NSPCC kind of evidence of digital risks to children that was published in 2023, this is in there, but it's actually across a lot of the literature as well. So the categories of risk are content risks. So that's involving particular content itself. Contact risks, so that's between people, so particularly things like grooming, things like that. Conduct risks, so that's behavior-based risks for young people. And then contract risks, which are to do with kind of economic or exploitative aspects or violations of their right in contracts and things like that, social media T's and C's, all those kind of things. You can see also down the left-hand column there, there's sort of different categorizations in terms of whether they are aggressive in nature, so relate to violence, sexual, or a values-based thing like misinformation, disinformation, for example. And some of those risks you'll find are cross-cutting, so they go across all of those. I would say if you only remember one thing from today's session, that you have a look at the Core 4 and this particular framework and use that as a way of approaching digital safeguarding in your own school, because it's such a comprehensive kind of overview of categorizing all the different risks that young people can face in a digital context. And it's underpinned by extensive academic research as well. When you do read a story with a scary headline or a scary report that's popped up, and it says, 80% of children have seen this type of content or that type of content, I would really recommend putting on a skeptical hat and going and investigating that particular report in a bit more detail. Do not just rely on the headline that you see. If you click through to see the report in its originality, and once you've opened up that report, before you read anything else in the report, I would recommend using Control or Command F and searching for methodology. Methodology will tell you how the research was conducted, and in particular the sample size that they used as well, because this is how many people were involved in the research. First thing to point out, if it involves young people directly, then I would say gold star for that, because any research about young people should involve young people's input, obviously, and opportunities for that. You can see here a few different examples of reports. When I went to have a look at how many children were involved in those reports, it really does vary. So, for example, the Youth Endowment Fund research that was published July 2024 is based on a survey of more than 10,000 children aged 13 to 17. That is an enormous sample size. So again, you kind of get the sense that they're getting quite a broad picture of what's going on there. For a point of comparison, just to kind of give you some context, the Crime Survey of England and Wales, which is conducted by the Office for National Statistics, in 2023-24 surveyed just 1,500 10 to 15-year-olds for that data. So quite a big difference. Again, the Children's Commissioner published a report in August this year that was a survey of 1,000 16 to 21-year-olds. They also did focus groups with 5 16 and 17-year-old girls. And another report that they've recently done about deep fakes, etc., was actually based on focus group research with 22 teens in total. So there's quite a big difference between the amount of young people that have input into some of those different reports. And it's good to be aware of that. I would also say, in terms of finding gold standard research insights, look for stuff that is peer-reviewed and scholarly in nature, i.e. that's been published in a journal article, and things like that, things that have been in academic books, etc. Also think about collaboration as well, because things that have been collaborated on by lots of different experts are probably more likely to be robust in terms of their findings. And also look for that academic expertise as well. Are the people involved in the research people that have got a long history and lots of experience of researching that area? Because they're going to bring a lot more contextual knowledge than somebody who's new to the field. So again, my gold standard recommendation would be the Digital Futures for Children Centre, which is run by the LSE. They are specifically set up to try and encourage evidence-based policies with regard to children's digital lives. And you can see a little example there of one of their reports is about smartphone policies in schools. What does the evidence say? So if you're thinking about reviewing your smartphone policy in schools, perhaps you're coming under a bit of pressure from parents or families or other groups, and you're not quite sure what the right approach is for smartphone use in schools, you can go and have a look at the DFC report looking into an overview of the evidence. What's great about that is if they don't have a lot of evidence for a link with something and something else, they will say that. They will just say there isn't a lot of evidence connecting this to this, or they might say there's a correlational link, but we don't know if it's causal, etc. So we'd really recommend that as the place to go if you want solid research insights. Research insights are brilliant for informing guidance for schools as well. You're probably all aware this summer we had new guidance issued on relationships and sex education for schools. And I'm really pleased to see that a lot of the guidance in there about what ought to be covered does cross over a lot with online media law. So they want us to be talking to young people about consent, about imagery, about deep fakes, about voyeurism, and all these other issues, which I think cross over a lot with kind of the stuff that we've been talking about already. And again, there's guidance from the government around nudes and semi-nude images being shared in schools and education settings. What I was really pleased to see in that guidance from March 2024 is that it's based on sociological research with children. So they've adapted a framework from Rolack and Finkelhor, which is looking at categories of risk. So there's the question of, is it aggravated? Has it got adults involved? Or is it youth only? And then, is there an intention to cause harm, or is it reckless? Is it experimental? Is it romantic? Is it sexual attention seeking, or is it something else? So it's using kind of research that's been conducted with young people to then inform some of those different categories of risk, because not the same behavior is always categorized in the same way. The context is really, really important when we're thinking about risk. And again, you'll see frameworks like Simon Hackett's continuum of children and young people's sexual behaviours being referred to when informing guidance for schools about sexual behaviour in children. So it's not as simple as, everything is bad. There's a scale of things to consider in different categories that involve appropriate, inappropriate, problematic, abusive, and violent. So the context and the research kind of informs all of those decisions that you make on a daily basis in schools with regard to safeguarding. That's what we like to call sociology in action. So I'm going to jump to my research now. So this is how I sort of accidentally became a sociologist and criminologist. So while I was conducting my education in schools, I actually managed to get some police funding to provide that training free to schools. And in the first year of the project in 2013, I single-handedly went into 45 schools and spoke to more than 9,000 young people aged between 11 and 18. What I did is I compiled some research and some quotes and fed that back to the Police and Crime Commissioner. And what was quite interesting is I didn't realise at the time how difficult it is to conduct research in schools. And particularly if you say, I want to go in and talk to young people about crime and sexuality and hate speech and all these other problematic issues as well. So being able to have that direct connection with young people was something that was a real advantage. And it's what led to me being offered a PhD scholarship to go and conduct research into what young people think is risky to do in a digital context, and very importantly, why. So I used that traffic light category of risk, gave them the different examples, asked them to say, where have you put it and why? And I basically wrote down in the workshops everything that they said verbatim in their own words for how they explained their constructs of risk and responsibility in a digital environment. And it was absolutely fascinating. And for those of you, again, that are interested in sampling and methodology, I spoke to 184 young people for that research, aged between 11 and 18. I ran 9 one-hour focus group sessions in 2 separate schools. And again, for qualitative research, that's quite a big sample. So I'm going to jump straight to some of the findings now, because I think the findings really is the most interesting part and hopefully the most useful for you as well. So some of the findings that we've got here. Firstly, older pupils were much more likely to think nothing was risky than the younger pupils. This probably isn't a surprise to you, because if you've got sweet little year 7s who are just starting school, you know what they're like. And sometimes they're very much in that mindset of, oh, that's really mean, or that's not very nice. Oh, that must be red. Put it in red. That's awful. It's kind of that very straightforward, almost black and white thinking on morality and the law, and very much if something's not nice, it's got to be red. The older pupils, the older teenagers, not so much. They were far more likely to sort of say, well, I don't think anything would happen, or quite often they would say, oh, well, what if it's just banter? They might talk about free speech, was a term that got used quite a lot. They might say, oh, it's just saying, it's not doing anything. So the older pupils had a lot more justifications for putting things in a lower risk category. So why does that matter to you as a school? Well, do not forget to revisit these issues with the older pupils. In fact, I would say these issues need to be revisited continually, because it's not the case that, oh, we've covered it off. And sometimes I do hear people saying that, where they're like, well, we don't need to worry about the sixth formers because they've done all their e-safety, back in year 7. And you think, well, they probably do actually need a revisit on that, because naturally, as they get older, they are getting more exposed to things online. They're having more experience of the online world, and they're then potentially more likely to say, actually, I don't think that is very risky. And as I've already mentioned, the law changes every year anyway. So those updates, particularly for the older pupils, are really, really important. The second thing is that a lot of the young people said to me, "Oh, I don't think that's risky because nobody would see it." So it's this idea that, or I don't think anyone would see it, or I don't think anyone would care, and it's this notion of audience. So if something had a lot of visibility and lots of people could see it, that was seen to increase the perception of risk. So that's quite interesting to note, because it may be the case that pupils think, oh, well, if it's hidden, if it's just in a closed group, or it's not spread around that many people, it's not going to be that risky. In actual fact, a lot of the media law offences that I talk about, in terms of sending, sharing, or distributing material, that can be to one person, even just one person. That can count as breaking the law. So it's actually not true that a smaller group of people, or a smaller group, or even sending it privately to someone means it's going to be less risky necessarily. That's not how the law always works. So that's something to keep an eye out for as well. Between peers, messages that were kept kind of in the pre-existing social context were often seen to be less risky. Lots of young people said to me, well, it could just be between friends. If it's just between friends, then it's not that bad. It's not that big a deal. It's probably not that risky, which is really interesting. Again, the role of peers in terms of changing how the risk is perceived. So again, I think young people can sometimes view kind of their peer group as a safer environment to push those boundaries and take risks, because it's between friends. So it's not as bad as if they were putting something out for strangers to see. That being said, in some cases, the opposite was true. So sometimes young people would say, oh, if you didn't know someone, or it was a total stranger, or it was online and it was anonymous or something like that, it wouldn't be as risky. So again, I think that's quite interesting. The idea that a total stranger can again be seen as less risky than your existing social group, presumably because you don't have that crossover and that bleed between the two different contexts. So it's worth bearing in mind. I think some teenagers and young people will be preferring to take risky behaviours with total strangers, as that's seen as less risky than their own social context. But for others, it could be the complete opposite is true. So it does vary. It's very much context specific, these understandings of risk. If a message was considered a bit vague or ambiguous, particularly if something like a threat was insinuated but not explicit, young people would often say that's less risky because it's not directly targeting someone, or it's not directly saying it's going to do this. Again, that is not the case when it comes to the law. So harassment, for example, is a course of conduct that causes a reasonable person alarm and distress. That course of conduct is not defined in law. Even sending somebody a message saying, I like that dress you're wearing today, in isolation, obviously that may not constitute harassment, but if it's part of a string of different behaviours that's meant to make that person feel like they're being watched all the time, then it's highly likely to kind of fall into the category of like threatening communications, or even harassment and stalking, like I mentioned, which is quite a serious crime. So the idea that if it's insinuated threats or insinuated offensive messages or hate speech or etc., it's not actually true that makes it less risky. It's very much the case that in a lot of these things, it's about context again, and particularly the context of how the victim is impacted by that behavior. So it's worth enforcing that when it comes to young people. Free speech and the rights of the sender to say what they want was one of the most common justifications that I heard from young people. So quite often they would say, oh, it's just saying this. It's just saying that it doesn't like these people. It's just saying it doesn't like those people. Or, yeah, that's really disgusting and offensive, but it is just their opinion. So this idea that it wasn't doing anything because it wasn't a physical interaction was quite a common misconception amongst young people. So again, we really need to emphasize for young people that if you're sending somebody a message or you're distributing material, you are doing something. That is doing something. Speech is action. Publishing text is an action. Broadcasting a video is taking action. And again, just because something is online doesn't mean it's not real. Just saying something is not a defense. Free speech is not a blanket right. It's very much a qualified right. If you actually look up the legislation, Article 10 of the Human Rights Act 1998, you'll see that freedom of expression has got two parts, one of which is your rights and freedoms, but the second part is your duties and responsibilities, and that includes keeping in line with the law, so lawful speech. So again, really important to be clear, free speech doesn't mean you can say whatever you want. There were many cases where young people would discuss how a victim was possibly responsible for what happened to them, maybe trying to blame them at times for what happened, or saying that it was up to them to take action against a perpetrator, for example, by suing them or taking them to court. So very much this idea that victims sometimes are on their own and individually responsible for managing the risks, rather than the platform's going to help you, or your teachers could help you, or your family could help you, or the police would help you. It's very much this idea of, well, the victim's kind of on their own to deal with those things. And related to that, very common for young people to say they didn't think there would be any consequences. They would say, you know, I don't think anything will happen, nothing gets done about this sort of thing. Everybody does this and nothing ever happens. Really, really common idea that there are no consequences for digital offences, which again is not true, as I try to highlight with a lot of the case studies. The police can and do take action about material that's shared in an online context and digital behaviour. Last couple of important findings. Little to no consensus on risk. This is a really important one, given that the group of young people that I spoke to were quite similar, quite homogenous. You know, they're from the same school, the same background, some of them were the same age in the same class, and they had completely different, wildly varying perspectives on what the risks are. I think is so fascinating. So again, I would say for you, if you're in a school, it's really important to have those direct channels of communication with young people, because it's not clear that just because nationally they say children think this or children are doing that, that's going to be the case. You may have a lot of variation in the perspectives on risk and the experiences of risk in a digital context within your own school community, actually. So it's really, really important to think about young people not as one big generalized homogenous group, but all these little micro variations on risk that vary from pupil to pupil as well. It's not that straightforward as everybody thinks this. And finally, embracing relativism. I suppose it's nice in a way, isn't it, that young people could sort of disagree respectfully with each other. But I was a bit disturbed at the extent to which people would say, oh, Susie thinks that's a red, Jake thinks that's a green. I suppose they're both right. Firstly, of course, they can't both be right, because there is a correct answer when it comes to the law, at least, and what's a crime online. There is a right answer. But it was really interesting how much there was this sort of embracing relativism, you know, this idea that everybody's entitled to their own view, everybody can have their own truth, and nobody's opinion is more important or more right than anybody else's. This kind of super easy breezy, let everybody have their view, I think at times does need challenging, because as I say, with crime, it is the case that sometimes there is a clear right answer, and that needs to be kind of made clear, I think, to young people. Lots of students were very comfortable and confident talking about some very dark and serious subject matter in these sessions. I had students talk to me about paedophilia, consent, rape, hate speech, prejudice, homophobia, racism. Misogyny was not mentioned by name, interestingly, although sexism was. But perhaps I think that's changing, because I do see how misogyny is getting recognised more as a term amongst young people. But I think it's really, really important that we lean into those opportunities for talking about things with young people directly, because this idea that they're not aware of sexual offending, or they're not aware of violence or crime or hatred, and we've got to shield them from it, is just not true. It's not backed up by evidence at all. Young people seem quite keen and confident to actually have those discussions, and a school can be a really useful point for them to have those discussions in a sort of safe and supported and well managed way. So we should be definitely trying to do that. Unfortunately, one of my examples that involved an allegation of a teacher-student relationship, nobody said anything about reporting that, making a disclosure and reporting it to the school as a potential outcome of that material. And I do think it's interesting, just looping back to the beginning of this presentation, that why don't people report risk is a really, really important question that we have to kind of keep focused on. A lot of young people didn't talk about the need to report that, or how somebody would probably report that if there was an allegation of a teacher-student relationship, even though that is exactly the sort of thing that really would need to be reported. So there's something there around, again, our safeguarding procedures, our reporting, and the ways that young people can make disclosures, and recognizing when they need to be made, but also the different options for doing that, that we need to possibly do more work on. I'm not going to go through all of these because we're running a little short on time, and I think this is the sort of thing that generally most of us will agree on now anyway. But in terms of recommendations for schools, obviously, I think that crime and law and human rights and citizenship all need to be integrated kind of into our education now, ideally in the curriculum. But just generally, particularly with PSHE, it's so important that we delve into some of these issues as much as we can, give young people the space to talk about them. I'm very pleased to see that the new relationships and sex education guidance does cover a lot of stuff on consent, the law, power and abuse, etc. So that's a move in the right direction. And again, language and terminology, using words like racism, harassment, misogyny, or voyeurism, that's starting to become the norm as well. And of course, making sure that we're never blaming victims, that we've got clear boundaries and consequences for digital behaviour, and making sure that we acknowledge that these are social problems that affect all of our society. I wouldn't resist the temptation to just blame technology, because certainly when it comes to things like, inciting hatred against minority groups, sexual violence or violence against women and girls, issues around power and consent and abuse, all of these predate the internet. They are social problems, and it's not as straightforward as simply banning the tech. So I'd bear that in mind as well. That's the end of my presentation for now. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A in a sec, but if I could just remind you that if you do need any support with anything that we've talked about today, there's a few different ways that you can get support there, and recommendations of who to get in touch with and who to signpost young people to. I always signpost Childline at the beginning and end of my presentations in schools, because they're brilliant for young people. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm quite easy to find on LinkedIn, Dr Holly Powell-Jones. You can also look at my website, Online Media Law. You can also just get in touch with me via email as well. So my email address is going to be shared below. But if I can leave you with top 3 takeaways, those are: 1, be critical and rigorous about reports and research findings. If you're not sure, use that kind of Digital Futures for Children Centre at the LSE that I mentioned. They're the gold standard. 2, think about barriers why young people might not report concerns with digital safeguarding. And that is our biggest kind of risk, I would say, and that needs to be tackled as a priority. And 3, try and involve the pupils as kind of active participants who are going to help us solve these problems. I really think the more that we consult with young people, get evidence, solutions and ideas from them, the quicker we're going to be able to tackle a lot of these issues, because we're meeting them where they already are, and learning a lot from them, as well as them learning a lot from us. And that's so important to keep this area moving forward in a positive way. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop there and hand back over to Lucy.
Wow, I told you guys you'd love that. So I don't know about you, but I took loads of notes. Thank you so much, Holly. You have made us all think really carefully about how we can make sure that our children and young people are safe in school. There's so much to think about. These issues are not going away, are they? Sadly. And so the more that we can do together to help keep them safe, the better it will be. And for those of you who didn't pick up on it, Holly does fabulous training for schools. So if you are interested in getting Holly into your school to talk to teachers, you also talk to pupils. Here's Holly's website, onlinemedialawuk.co.uk. And I'm sure, you know, you'd be very happy to go in and support schools, because it's a big thing, isn't it? It's a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just evolves so quickly. So a lot of the schools that I'm in and talking to, they want me back next year. And sometimes they're coming to me with a list of particular digital issues that they've had problems with. And they're like, we really would love it if you could focus on these areas. And I'm always happy to kind of tailor material to what schools feel they need covering off. And I should mention as well as sessions for pupils, I will do them for staff and also parents as well, because increasingly the schools are saying we actually really want the parents to come in so that they're aware about what is and isn't a criminal matter online, because I'm sure you all know what it's like. You want to make sure those messages are reinforced at home, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's fabulous what you do. I really do. And your knowledge is just superb. You've got so much experience and knowledge in the area. It's lovely to hear, and it's great to see the brilliant work that you're doing to keep young people safe. So thank you so much. We haven't had any questions, Holly. It's really unusual. So obviously they're all thinking about stuff. So, but if you think of a question afterwards, then you know what to do. You can drop them in the comments underneath the video, and then I will either pass them on to Holly or I'll have a go at answering them myself. But I will always ask the expert.
I would say I'm quite easy to find on LinkedIn as well. So if anybody has got a question that they think of, you know, next week, next month, and they think, oh, I really should have asked this, do reach out to me, do get in touch. And even if I don't have the answer, I'll try and signpost the right place to go looking, because I know a lot of it can be very overwhelming.
Yes, it can, definitely. And also, you know, the term isn't fully started yet, so questions might not be there yet. So if term gets away and you think, oh, actually I do now have quite a major, you know, situation, I need some help with this, maybe I need to talk to my children about a topic. Holly, would you do like an online assembly? Or
yeah, I have done. Yeah, absolutely. Particularly during COVID, obviously, when we were all in lockdown, all of my sessions moved digitally, and it's very similar for what happened then. So sometimes it will be the case that schools will say, "We'll have you up on a screen, and you can sort of present through." And I'll still put up the examples and the little traffic lights, and the teachers will sort of in the comments report back on what they voted for and why, or they'll field the questions and then put them in the comments section. So that's absolutely fine as well. And I do often think that the questions that I get from pupils and the Q&A bit is the most interesting part, really, because it's a chance for the staff to really hear where the pupils' minds are at because of what they're asking. And so that can be really revealing as well, I think.
Oh, amazing. So you do go into school. So if you're nearby, Holly will come and see you. But if not, Holly can be online. and doing online training for staff, pupils and parents. I think it's fabulous what you do. We're super grateful that you came to talk to us today. Here's Holly's website. I'll put all the information underneath this webinar so that you can contact Holly at your leisure and enjoy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Holly. Take care. Have a good day, everyone.